Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the final session of the World is Our Lab webinar series, a partnership between Wings and Leping Foundation. Before we start, I just want to share a quick reminder with you that the session is going to be recorded, and we'll share the recording with you in a couple of days. We also have simultaneous translation, so feel free to select your best choice on the menu below. And finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them on the chat or the Q&A box during all this session. Now I'll give the word to Benjamin Belgi, Wings Executive Director, to start the call.
Okay, thank you, Bia. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you from all over the world for the third and the closing session of the World is Our Lab 2021 event series. For those who are not familiar with what we do, Wings is a global network of organizations who are committed to unlocking the full potential of philanthropy as a catalyst for social progress. And our community includes more than 190 member organizations across close to 60 countries. And the World is Our Lab is a partnership between the Leping Foundation for Social Innovation and Wings to bring together international and Chinese thought leaders, practitioners, and experts to discuss some of the most critical issues of our times and of our field. So we hope today's event will challenge us to think beyond the conventional wisdom of what philanthropy is and offer us the opportunity to explore what it can and what it must become. So during the previous sessions, we have explored how to reinvent power relationships in philanthropy and turn our field into an accelerator for a new power distribution that puts communities at the center. We also talked about ways that we can reinvent economic models so that they deliver stronger social and environmental outcomes. And so today we're really excited to have an incredible lineup of speakers that will explore how we can leverage technology in our work towards the common good and examine the role philanthropy can play in building healthy digital societies. How can we move engaging with questions around new technologies, internet, artificial intelligence from a small circle of experts to a major issue that is central to all philanthropic actors, whether big or small, and regardless of their thematic focus. And that's because the technological revolution that is being dramatically accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis can no longer remain a niche issue. The revolution happening before our eyes is touching every single aspect of life and society and is no longer a distant threat or promise. It's here to stay and here to continue its exponential conquests. So whatever you are working on, health, education, environment, it is already having a major impact, and it is very likely that it will have also huge consequences in your area. It may even make your approaches or even your mission irrelevant tomorrow. So this is why we are collectively trying to imagine the society that we want and how can philanthropy help us get there. And then looking at the technology level is absolutely critical in this reflection. So if we're taking just an example, if we look at the economic inclusion question or education, we have to anticipate the fact that half of the world's workforce will no longer be needed by 2050 due to technology. So tech and its unpredictable consequences can be daunting, and we have been sometimes a bit slow at engaging and at investing in this area. So where do we start? What role can we play at our own level? So that may be first in building a digital infrastructure and capacity for those we seek to support, to allow them not only to cope with the tech changes, but also to help shaping healthy and inclusive digital societies. And to quote an Indian philanthropist, Rohini Nilekani, we think that philanthropy might be positioned to help build societies that are not tech-enabled, but that are tech-enabled and not tech-led. So we have an incredible lineup of thought leaders today, as I was saying, from around the world, and they will help us understand some of these big issues and how philanthropy can help solve them. I will now pass the floor to Jafsan from the Leping Foundation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Benjamin. So thank you all the panelists. It's my pleasure to be here with you for tonight. Since a lot of audience are from China, so I will start speaking Chinese. 大家好，各位晚上好。非常欢迎大家来到由北京乐平公益基金会和 Wings 一起主办的这个世界是我们的实验室The World is Our Lab 这个系列的工作坊第3期探讨这个人本科技新的这些科技力量是如何能够改变这个一个挑战性的世界局面的这样的一个话题。特别是在2021这一年我们其实非常希望这个疫情早点过去，但是好像 Omicron 又来了，然后好像很多这个让我们这个忧虑的情况并不能很快的摆脱，所以呢，这样的一个时间点，我想我们来讨论一下这个科技怎么推动社会创新推动这种以人为本的社会的发展，还是蛮当其时的。至少我们在我们在看到在疫苗和这个病毒的赛跑当中这个竞赛还是非常的激烈的。那乐平在过去的这个12年间呢，就是我们一直在推动这个全球化的社会创新学习，也一直在推动怎么样把一个热气腾腾飞速发展的充满挑战的中国介绍给这个世界各国的这个同道中人。那在过去的工作当中呢，我们主要是希望以一个创新生态的催化者和创新生态的建设者这样的一个这个业务定位呢，来规范我们的工作。所以我们和斯坦福大学百科中心一起联合出版了这个斯坦福社会创新评论的中文刊并且以这个斯坦福中国社会创新年会和这个中文刊为核心呢，来创建一个全球性的社会创新学习的中国节点建立这样的一个中国化本地化的一个社会创新的一个知识生产中心和社群。同时呢，我们也和这个中国的一系列的艺术家做了各种各样的合作和资助呢，来建立一个把中国和世界社会创新和这个公益经济的这个发展呢通过现实性的叙事来连接大众，建立更广泛连接的这样一个建设性叙事的这样的一个社区
The encountering with the different challenges. And so in our previous works, actually, we want to translate the good ideas into groundbreaking practices and by going deep into the social innovation. So this is why we work together with Stanford University, and we have released the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and also we have organized the annual meeting. And so we want to create a global ecosystem from China and also to establish a local knowledge base as well as a society in China. And so we are closely working with artists in terms of the philanthropic undertakings. And so hopefully we can foster the philanthropic career in China. And also we want to strengthen the connection with the communities. At the same time, we also work with a innovation lab to establish the stakeholder-driven economy and also to promote the lending of the innovative projects. And during this process, we can see that the B economy or the stakeholder-driven economy has a long-term development in China, and it becomes an essential part for the economic development here. So just as I have mentioned, actually, we are seeing new challenges posed by the economic development. And so there are many foundations and also organizations in China, just like Leping, are paying special attention to this trend. And actually, we have 3 focuses currently, or areas that we would give priorities to. So I'd like to share with you today, and also in the panel discussion session, we can also have a conversation with the experts. So first of all, in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, there's one thing that is really important. It is actually we pay attention to the ethical problems brought forward or brought along with the advancement of technology. So we can see that, for example, the platform economy in China, they are facing a lot of challenges in terms of the rules and regulations. And also, people are starting new conversations and discussions about the leftover problems during the process of industrialization. And so there is a continuous discussion about this. And actually, we are also paying attention to the practices all over the world. And the second one is when we talk about the people-oriented technologies, it is not really about any specific individual. Instead, actually, we want to pay attention to the vulnerable groups and also whether they can benefit from the improvement of the society and also the development of technology. And so actually at different points, there might be unemployment issues. So we actually want to find out how we can better help and serve the vulnerable groups. And also there's another thing in China, which is not commonly seen from other countries, which is normally the development is oriented or dominated by enterprises. And for example, the B Corp is one of the kind. And they are trying to reshape the way how they handle things with innovative technologies. And even there are B community and also B movement in different cities. So how do we utilize the role of data? Because in China, there's a large number of enterprises who have their B standards, which is data-driven. So we'd like to see what kind of role they are playing in this regards. And so those are actually the three things that concerns us most. And I just want to take this opportunity to share with you. And I would give the floor back to Benjamin to introduce our panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So I will simply introduce our moderator and facilitator for the session who will present the other speakers for today. So glad to welcome Frederike Kaltheuner. Frederike is the director of the European AI Fund, which is a philanthropic initiative to strengthen civil society in Europe. She is also a special advisor for the vice president of the European Commission. Frederike, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for the kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to speak at this event today about a topic that's very dear to me. When we are discussing the role of technology and in discussions like these, the assumption is often that powerful technologies like AI essentially work like a kitchen knife. So the idea is that you can use them for good or you can use them for harm. And it's our job as either civil society, as academia, or as philanthropy to make sure that technology is used for good rather than harm. The reality, however, is much, much more complex. We are living in a world that is increasingly made of data, and that world is also increasingly automated. And both of these developments have far-reaching implications for the power relationships between individuals, companies, and also the state. So when we talk about technology, it means that we're not talking about the equivalent of a kitchen knife, but we are very quickly talking about big issues. We're talking about geopolitics, and we also have to talk about some very fundamental questions, such as what kind of world do we want to live in, and what role can and should technology play in this vision for the future? I'm saying this as the introduction because these are some of the issues that we are tackling at the European AI Fund. The European AI Fund is a philanthropic initiative of more than 10 foundations that work globally and in Europe to shape the direction of AI in Europe. The pursuit of this vision includes addressing the role that AI may play in entrenching or amplifying structural forms of discrimination or inclusion, such as racism, gender, or prejudice. And with this fund, we're working towards a world where AI saves the interests of both individuals and society. So with this very short introduction, I would very much like to introduce today's keynote speaker, Leslie Go. Pre-recorded this keynote Q&A. I'm afraid we are not hearing the sound. If we could maybe go back to the beginning of the video, and then we can hear all of her thoughtful contributions.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here. Unfortunately, I won't be in China today. This background is my last memory of 2019, when I was invited by Leping and Stanford University to speak at a similar event, and how time flies. And today, I'm very honored to be here to share with you some of the learnings in the last 2 years, and also celebrating a new book launch at the Brookings Institute called The Breakthrough. And it is a book about the promise of frontier technology for sustainable development goal. And there are 15 of us who contributed to this book about technology that can affect the human condition and the natural world within the next 10 years. And my chapter is about digital agriculture. So during COVID, I spent the last 2 years researching into agriculture. And what I've learned that it is an integral part of economic activity and 26% of employment globally. 700 million of them live below the poverty line. Hence, strengthening the income of the smallholder farmers will have a significant impact to poverty reduction. And in most countries in the East Asia Pacific region, where I happen to focus a lot of my work, is about agriculture that contributes to 15% of the GDP of the region and employ close to 40% of the labor force. However, agriculture sector remains highly labor intensive and for low-income workers only. So COVID-19 has also accentuated and amplified the weaknesses and hidden costs of global food system. Unsafe handling of food in production facilities and market increase the risk of animal to human transmission. With 2 billion people being undernourished or malnourished, and with 2 billion people being overweight and obese, COVID-19 has exposed the risk of poor diets, considering the link between compromised immune systems, pre-existing conditions, and COVID mobility. The disruption of food supply chains and caused by COVID-19 response measures has further increased the already high level of food loss and waste. About 1/3 of agricultural production is lost or wasted. At the same time, the challenges that the global food system is facing are not going away. We still need about 56% more food produced by 2050 to feed 9.8 billion people. We need to do this in a way to avoid further land expansion. And we need to do this in a way that significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. In accordance with this notion, the food system that contributes to a healthy economy by being a driver of inclusive growth, it contributes to healthy human by providing which are directly linked to the quality of human capital. And it also contributes to a healthy planet by providing nature-based solutions. Currently, there's a gap between the vision and reality. How can we support that efficient, equitable, and sustainable digital transformation of agri-food system? One key enabler is digital technology. Agri-tech is the use of digital technology to improve agriculture yields and profitability for the smallholder farmers. Emerging markets, such as Indonesia, has a dynamic and vibrant agri-tech ecosystem in 5 key business models: farmers advisory, peer-to-peer lending, traceability, digital marketplace, and mechanization. A way to analyze the digital agriculture ecosystem is to look at the use cases that support each of the business models. For the farmer advisory, providing farmers with information about price, crop planning, weather, as well as pest and disease control. Peer-to-peer lending enables farmers to access capital and with low interest rates. Traceability, first mile data collection to enable traceability of food across the entire value chain. And digital marketplaces, connecting farmers to buyers and input suppliers. And lastly, but very important, mechanization platform, on-demand platform to support all the above farm activities with machineries and robotics. And this slide comes from Grow Asia. It talks about the different business models. And here's another example of across the several countries in Southeast Asia, how agri-tech has contributed many countries for the ecosystem play. Now, there are 3 critical factors for the digital transformation in agriculture: data, innovation, and partnerships that brings multi-stakeholder partnership between public and private sector together, and leveraging institutional innovation to foster cross-fertilization of knowledge and productive partnerships between government and private sector, catalyzing data sharing, experimentation, and testing of disruptive technology in a way that will help many of the smallholder farmers be able to adopt new technology and new approach to help with their farming outcome. And scaling proven solutions through national level engagements for an efficient, equitable, and environmentally sustainable food system. Now, when we talk about all those concepts, I wrote the research and also the chapter for about over a year ago. And at the same time, I wanted to use the research to help us think through how do we make that digital experience real for the client country that I support in Indonesia. So this year, the World Bank Group, in partnership with the Indonesia Ministry of Agriculture and other key private sector partners, and there were 10 of them, to envision a series of hackathons and innovation challenges that facilitate the adoption of digital technology and develop the agriculture ecosystem for AgTech to thrive in Indonesia. Together with the government of Indonesia, at Ministry of Agriculture and West Java provincial government, the World Bank convened this multi-stakeholder partnership to really create a new way of thinking that started from September to November. In fact, we just ended the data hackathon on November 10th with the winners of the hackathon. And the objective of that hackathon is to demonstrate the value of data and digital technology to address the key challenges in Indonesia agri-food system, as well as to build the capacities of young innovators to develop digital solutions for agriculture. And when we announced that, it was in line with the National Farmers' Day on September 24th. And with 3 key areas that we focus on to demonstrate the use of technology by co-creating between government and private sector, to build a capacity of agri-tech innovators so that they can learn from international knowledge exchange, and by piloting such ideas to really mainstream all these new concepts into the World Bank operation and helping scale out this kind of innovation. We focus on 3 key problem statements. One is farmer productivity and resiliency to climate and related shocks. The other one is facilitating farmers' access to finance. And third is connection to public sector, making better decision and policy process. And China also has something similar. In fact, you might have heard of Pinduoduo, and you may also have used that as well in your daily apps. We invited Pinduoduo to speak at several events, and they were also part of the closing ceremony of the Data Hackathon. And over the years, we learned a lot about the China agriculture ecosystem. And with Pinduoduo, they connected 16 million farmers to over 850 users in China. Throughout the agriculture, smart agriculture competition, Pinduoduo provided a global platform for young technologists to demonstrate what is possible by combining crop science and AI and challenge them to create practical solutions for the industry. Last year at the inaugural event, they saw AI teams challenged to use machine learning and IoT to remotely produce more strawberries. And they were able to find out 3 times more strawberries than the traditional growers. And 2 of them, AI teams were then able to commercialize ideas and partner with traditional farmers to improve the yield. They also launched a 2nd edition of this competition recently to grow tomatoes. So this year, their focus is on evaluation of how the nutritional content and environment impact using technology to pave the way for more sustainable farming practice that is better for the people and the planet. And it is very important to also note how Pinduoduo is investing in this space with $10 billion, renminbi, in the agriculture innovative research as well. And it really accelerate a lot of the innovation with that kind of focused effort from the private sector, working in conjunction with all these partners that they have listed on the website. So I would summarize that in these key areas where human capital development is key, not just as a catalyst, but is also the fuel to sustain long-term agricultural transformation. And multi-stakeholder collaboration can help support that, as well as bring agri-tech and young entrepreneurs together, which in this case also providing capital investment and improving the capacity of smallholder farmer along the way. And that also help improve the kind of jobs creation and the outcome for agriculture. And lastly, when we can digitize supply and demand information and better match them between farmers and consumers, we can minimize food loss and waste by better understanding what is happening at each of the farm level and crop level information. We can effectively and efficiently understand what kind of crop to produce and how do you be more efficient with the resource usage and pave the way for a greener future in agriculture. And if you're interested in this topic, feel free to check out the World Bank publication, What is Cooking? The Digital Transformation of the Agri-Food System, which proposed a roadmap through which data and digital technology can lead to efficient and equitable and environmentally sustainable food systems, and looks at the role of the public sector and private sector partnership to deliver this kind of outcome in a way that will really help the better future for all in achieving better health and healthier economy, as well as healthier planet. With that, I wish you a great event. And I hope that together with young innovators, you will then be able to look into technology as an enabler for a force for good. Thank you so much for letting me share my thoughts and the recent launch of the book. And we look forward to learning more from China and also learning about your events in future. All the best. Thank you so much.
That was a really fascinating and interesting contribution. With this, I would like to move on to our panel discussion. We have three esteemed speakers, which I'll introduce to you one after the other. So the first speaker is Chris Worman. Christopher Worman has been working with and for civil society since 1999. After starting out in digital communications and community building at large CSOs, Chris joined the Peace Corps in 2005 and landed in Romania, where he started several rural social enterprises. In 2009, Chris opened TechSoup's Romania program, and recently Chris launched Connect Humanity Fund, a fund for digital equity to serve as a learning and investing platform for foundations to begin engaging more effectively in digitization. I hope this was correct, Chris. You were somewhat irritated by one of the year words.
Yeah, no, I think it was more being surprised at how long I've been doing this and how young I still look, right? But
most definitely. Our second panelist is Max Schulze. Max Schulze is the co-founder and executive chairman of the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance. With a background as a software engineer and a cloud expert, Max brings his experience to the transformation of the digital economy, making it future-proof and sustainable. Throughout his career, he has dedicated himself to the well-being of people and the planet, and Max is committed to creating a positive future for the next generation. Welcome to the discussion, Max. And finally, our third speaker is Sun Ping. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sophie Sun Ping is an assistant professor at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. She has a PhD from the Chinese University of Hong Kong and was a visiting scholar of Oxford University. Her research interests are platform economy, digital labor, and ICTs. She was the winner for the best paper in the International Communications Association and Chinese Internet Research Conference. Congratulations. Thank you all for joining today. I want to start off this discussion with a very fairly basic question, but I think which will be of great interest to our listeners, which is, tell us a bit more about your work and your motivation to choose work in this sector, and focusing specifically around issues of technology. We can start with Ping Sun. Would you be comfortable starting?
Okay, thank you, Frederike. So since I'm in Beijing and I was required to speak Chinese, so now I need to switch to Chinese. 各位晚上好。
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm really glad to join you with today's workshop. And my name is Sun Ping. Just as Frederike has introduced, I'm from the China Academy of Social Science. So as a scholar, my research in the past mainly focused on the digitalization and also the group of people relevant to the digitalization. For example, my PhD thesis was themed in the background of the fact that China has really low labor costs, but actually for programmers, they actually retire from about 35 years because their work can be really exhausting. And this is a really funny topic. And then when I returned from China, Hong Kong to Beijing, I began to pay attention to the fundamental layer of the digitalization technology, because I can see that there is profound changes brought forward by the advancement of technology. But actually, there is a great number of people who are at the bottom line of the society, who are suffering from some negative impact from the digitalized technology. So we have done a research targeting on the group of people such as delivery guys and also the home service people. The reason why I started this topic is because actually we have more than 20 billion, more than 2 billion people who are doing those primary jobs with low payment. That means in the future, 1 out of the 3 people in China will be affected, will suffer some negative effect to some extent. That's the end of my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are fascinating numbers. In my travels in China, I was always really fascinated by the delivery economy. It's similar and then very different to the companies that run in Europe. Chris, would you like to go next and share a bit more about your motivation to focus on this topic specifically in your work?
Sure. So first off, thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to join the panel today. I think a couple of facts that help sort of frame the conversation for me, and maybe a little bit of background on sort of why I've spent 20 years thinking about this and why I will spend probably another 20 years thinking about this. So the 2 facts. Last year, I ran a global survey of civil society about sort of the effects of digitalization and COVID on what they do. And one of the points that came back was that 82% of the services delivered by civil society were disrupted during COVID. Not because they didn't have technology, but because the communities they serve, to Jeff's point earlier, the vulnerable communities we often most care about in philanthropy, their communities did not have the technology they needed to be served as the world had to go online during the pandemic. Second, in the last decade, as digitalization has accelerated clearly, in the United States, only 0.04% of philanthropy has gone into anything digital. So if you think about that, the communities we care about are outrageously harmed, to Ping Sun's point, by some of the effects of digitalization, and we're not investing. So stepping back a little bit then about that juxtaposition and why I care about it, at the risk of perhaps sounding a little philosophical, but to the benefit of perhaps grounding some of this conversation, not in fear and futurism, but in some of the reasons that civil society might actually care and philanthropy might actually care. Paul Hawken laid out a metaphor for civil society as a human immune system. This idea that a person gets angry about some challenge in their community, and like a white blood cell to an infection, they try to solve it. And if they can't, they bring their friends. And if they can't, as a group, they formalize, they become an NGO, a civil society organization. And if they get really good at it, they bring a lot of people together around policy change. And they actually change the rules of the system so that the infection goes away. It's an interesting arc to think about. As a metaphor, it's okay. You know, all metaphors fall apart at a certain point. But if it is true, it gives us an opportunity to think about civil society as a massive collective intelligence mechanism. There are theoretically 10 to 12 million NGOs on the planet. And if they're all acting as that immune system, they are out there testing and learning all the time, millions of little experiments in how to fix what is broken in policy and society. To the sort of theme of this, the world is our lab. They are the lab, they are the experiment, they are doing all of this work. Their insights are critical. Their insights are critical not just in policy work, but in philanthropy. And there are examples about how this in a digitalized world can come together. So ECAS is a social service application developed in Ireland. It was built with a group of civil society organizations who couldn't get the technology they needed to do their jobs. So we helped them build it. Essentially, it's a very simple case management solution that helps capture the data from their work in the formats they need so that they can do their jobs. What came out of it, though, that I think is really fascinating, and I promise I'm going to wrap up very soon here. What got really fascinating about this was that it exemplified this idea of collective intelligence in a digitalized world when civil society can truly leverage technology. What they were able to do collectively with 80% or more, I think it's now almost 90% of the social service organizations in Ireland using this tool, they had data coming together in the same format from across the country. And they could sit down with the government and they could represent their communities. They could bring grassroots real-time insight to policymakers, and whatever policymakers may think they know, they often don't have that level of detail. Civil society does. Civil society does collectively. They could bring it to the table and say, invest over here. Something is going wrong over here. We need help over here, not over there. I know you wrote that policy 3 years ago, but it's no longer relevant. The need is here now. That is a fascinating thing for us to think about and a beautiful example of what can happen when we have this sort of massive laboratory testing and learning, and we can actually collect the intelligence. It does require the capacity to collect it, though. ECAS works because Ireland is extremely connected, because people have devices, because they have the skills to use those devices. Half of the world is not connected. Most of the world does not have the capacity to generate that kind of data. And this is a great conversation then to get into about where philanthropy comes in as a sector who can do what the corporate sector is not willing to do for profit purposes, serving the poor, or what governments are often able or intelligent enough to do, able in the terms of their timelines. It's just super hard for governments to actually wrap their heads around financing technology appropriately with the speed that it's moving. So I think I'll stop there for the moment, but if we do think about the vulnerable people that Jeff raised, if we think about sort of some of the things that get exciting, at least from my perspective, and where philanthropy can play, looking forward to the rest of that conversation in my next 20 years in this sector.
Thank you so much, Chris. I very much like the idea of the immune system or civil society as an immune system. That's a very, very vivid image. Max, your focus is on transforming the digital economy and making it future-proof and sustainable. What is your key motivation to work on these issues?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I always like to start with a definition of sustainability because I'm German, and it is the English word is derived from the German word, which means Nachhaltigkeit. And it's a balance of economics, society, and the environment. I just want to remind us of that because it has become a synonym for the green transition. Sustainability is more than just the environment. It's also about people, and it's also about a business case. I spent more than 15 years now in the tech sector, and funny enough, I have the perfect example to answer your question from the previous presentation, because it was about agriculture. And the company that was presented, the competition that was presented, is a company that I also invested in, called 30 megahertz. It's about IoT sensors in a greenhouse, because greenhouses are a key technology to actually overcoming how we feed the world. And the company is also active in China, by the way, and very welcomed there. And my point is this: when I started investing in these companies, I did so because I wanted to invest in a better future for my children. And when I worked on the technology that I did work on, it was the same purpose. But I did realize that there is an impact of the software itself. And that is what we don't talk about, because there is no transparency on that. There is an impact on society, there is an impact on the environment. And we shout digitalization is the solution to everything. We're going to solve every problem on this planet with digital technology. And I do agree with Chris that connectivity is key. But I think we also need to weigh the consequence. I think if there's one thing we learned as society from history now, is that we always need to look at the long-term consequence of what we are investing in and what we're doing. And that's fundamentally why I do what I do now. And I stopped building technology, and now I try to think about what's the consequence of that, and bring, so to say, the technology sector to that discussion. That's me.
That's a brilliant transition to the next question that I first want to pose to Ping Sun again. In your research on the platform economy, based on your experience about the risks and the fact that risks are very unequally distributed, they affect certain people more than others. Based on the research you've done, do you think that there should be a boundary to what technology should or shouldn't do? Or is that even the wrong question to ask?
谢谢 Frederike， 这是一个很有趣的问题。
So it's a funny question.
尝试在中国的语境下回答这个问题。
So I'll try to answer this question in the context of China. So actually in China, it seems to us that there is no boundary for technology because everything we do is surrounded by science and technology, especially in the last 2 decades. The development of IT network is unprecedented, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by how fast the speed is.
So for example, if we go out and didn't bring our cell phone with us, probably we will feel quite worried. So when we talk about a platform, is there something, or is there some technology things are quite make people concerned, or the boundary? So actually what we discuss most is about the digital technology black box, because we're all talking about artificial intelligence. And then you will find that it might be a very useful technology, but people are worrying that we don't know how to operate the technology, especially what is the algorithm at the background. And the other thing is privacy. And of course, privacy, I think in the Western context, is also a heated topic as well. And another thing is about commercialization. And how should we put it? Because big data can empower or enable artificial intelligence. So whenever we start an app, there is a function and says it will have the user profile. And this kind of user profile will lead or will actually give the guidance to your consumption, because it will push accurately about your products that you might interest. So people are quite worrying that we have already lost the control over data, because there's a lot of new technology data, and they're controlled by the platform companies, but not on individuals. So this might be a very severe issue.
I have another question for Chris, but just a quick remark. Do feel free to raise your hand and respond to each other. We want this to be an interactive conversation. I'm passing on the same question to Chris, but I'm adding in a slight provocative question as well. Is it not slightly techno-optimistic to say that in order to utilize the intelligence that's created by civil society, we need technology?
Is it not techno-realistic? I don't know. I mean, I think back to one of the points that I made at the end, the world is digitalizing. Governments are investing in digital services. For instance, governments are investing in digital services. They're moving healthcare services online. In the United States last year, if you wanted to participate in the census, you had to do it online. Meanwhile, 20% of Americans are not online. 40% of Black Americans are not online, 40% of Latino Americans are not online, and 75% of Native Americans are not online. The census determines trillions of dollars of government subsidies that are determined for those communities' benefit. That money is supposed to flow to those communities. The only way it flows to those communities is if we have the data about who they are, where they are, and what their needs are, which flows out of the census, which, see prior point, happened online. So it is happening. I would say that is the realistic part. It is happening. Digitalization is not stopping, whether we like it or not. There was a speaker at a conference a while back who was talking about big data. He equated humanity right now with big data to cavemen with fire. And this idea that initially when humans figured out fire, they were like, ooh, it's warm. Ooh, it has utility. It cooks my food and keeps away scary animals in the night. And then, oh no, I'm on fire. I'm being burned. And that we don't fully understand or, and can't, I think, arguably, to Ping Sun's point, fully understand the immensity of the challenges, the immensity of the changes, the shifts that are happening in the fourth industrial revolution and the digitalization of society. It is a megatrend, which means by nature, we cannot understand all of the impacts of it. So I think this is where I would really hope to see, in a optimistic way, to blend the realism, that with this happening anyway, The sector that will stand for the vulnerable, that will stand for rights, that will stand for human dignity is civil society. It always has been civil society. And that with that being the case, they are being left behind while the world digitalizes, which makes a pretty strong argument for philanthropy to get in there and engage and understand holistically what digitalization means. It is not just AI. It is not just algorithms. It is all sorts of things reshaping the worker that Ping Sun talked about and their job future. It's also creating new jobs. Who's going to take those jobs? Millions of jobs around the world that are being unfilled right now because people don't have the skills to fill them. So as these shifts happen and create ramifications that we simply cannot comprehend, we need a sector who can stand there and say, but wait a second, don't forget people. Don't forget their dignity. Don't forget my mother who barely knows how to Google. Don't forget these humans who have value because they're people. They're humans. They need to be looked after as well. We can't simply forget them as we digitalize. That is civil society's job. It always has been. So again, that was a rambling answer perhaps to your question, but I don't think I think there's a realism that we need to grapple with and build our own understandings about how to think and learn as philanthropy to step up to this moment. I don't think we necessarily have those skills in our sector yet.
Those are really important points to follow up on one aspect of what you said. If you say digitization is happening, does it mean we have the space as civil society or philanthropy to ask whether there are boundaries to what technology should and shouldn't do?
I think we have the space, and I think we need to claim the space. You know, when other major shifts have happened, Ms. Go, when she was speaking about agriculture and ag tech earlier, my father was an agricultural economist. He was one of the perpetrators of the Green Revolution. We've been through various kinds of industrial revolutions in the past, and civil society has been there. The Rockefeller Foundation in China, in Africa, all over the world was a huge advocate for a more responsible green revolution. They worked on the policy level. They worked on research. They helped people understand how to frame the conversation in human terms. I think there's a very similar moment and opportunity right now. The work you're doing, Frederike, with the AI Fund is helping try to frame AI in terms that are not simply techno-optimistic or techno-utopian. We have to spend some of that time, I think, helping do that part of philanthropy, the sort of philanthropy that goes into policy and advocacy work and does not necessarily pump the brakes, but try to raise the voices that will otherwise be simply bulldozed under because they don't have the political capacity to raise the voices themselves. Meanwhile, I think we do need to be thinking about, again, some of these more persistent digital divide and digital equity issues, because the sort of good things that we want will not manifest if half of humanity is simply left out of the equation. So I do think that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to engage. We also need to do that. Last thing I'll say, this time, I promise. The last thing I would say is we do have a responsibility within our own foundations to work on our own technology infrastructure. The foundation community is huge. Many people do not have their own technology in a state where they could do the kind of monitoring, evaluation, and learning that they needed to actually understand if their philanthropy was having the effect that they wanted, much less some of the things that Max cares about in terms of the green impact. Where is their data housed? How much carbon are they contributing to with their choices, either as investment portfolios or on the more simple side? It's like, is your data stack somewhere that is horrific for the environment? Probably. We have to think about these things. We have to learn.
Again, a really good transition to a question I wanted to pass on to Max. And again, feel free, all of you, to jump in if you have a comment on what some of the other panelists have said. We as the AI Fund, we support an environmental organization as well. However, I think when you talk critically about technology, there's usually an emphasis on personal data, on the way that technology affects humans and society. And I think rightly so, because this is where important transitions and changes are happening. At the same time, there's this entire different category of using technology in places like greenhouse gases. And I'd love to just hear a bit more from you, what your sense is about this, the framing of the debate, tech for good, tech for bad. I personally have a problem with it because I think it's more complex. But yeah, how come you focus on the use of technology, let's say, in the environment rather than other aspects?
Yeah, I think that is one of the magic questions. I will try to also tie it together a little bit with a commentary on what Chris said before, and an educational piece. So I think one of the fundamental issues that I personally have, being the only software engineer, I think, in this conversation right now, is, and in general, the more I'm in this nonprofit world and philanthropy and so civil society, is that there's so much lack of knowledge of how software actually works and what it does, right? That it's very difficult to make statements such as, what are the limitations of technology? Because the limitations of technology are natural boundaries based on, for example, the cost of an input, right? You would never make a table out of titanium because financially that's very undesirable. However, you make it out of wood and it has some positive consequence, and you can see the table and you know it's made out of wood, right? There's a certain set of transparency, and most industries now, we have what is called supply chain transparency. So I can see what goes into my sweater, right? Now, apply that to software. Software has no limitations at the moment because the fundamental ingredient, data, has no legal nor financial limitations. I can monitor your behavior on the internet, right? And I can mine your data and I can feed that into software and turn that into something else. There's no legal restriction on, behavioral data versus data I collected myself, data from sensors that I own or that I don't own or that my customers own. Data is free and it's nearly in unlimited form available, and I can mine it without almost any legal boundary. So for me, the question at the moment is not where should we set the limits of technology, but what inputs, so what data do we allow software to use? And that boils down to transparency, because today the fundamental problem with most AI or data processing machines or data processing software is that you don't know what went into it. And that's a very important point. And to me, it's important that people think that software is somehow different from traditional factories. Software is a device that you input data into and it outputs something else, right? It's like a factory. Ingredients in, new material out, or new product out. And it's not different, and it's not special in that sense. It's just a different type of factory in that sense. So to tie that back to your question, tech for good, it's if you use environmental data, for example, that comes from a government to solve a really complicated problem using software, I think that's a great way of applying software. And I think software can do one thing that humans are not good at, and that is if you take the supply chain of a phone, for example, right? There's more components in a phone than in a car. The supply chain of a phone is incredibly complex. If I map it out for you on a whiteboard, you're going to look at it and be like, wow, how do we going to figure out the carbon footprint of this? And that's the point. If you then have data from across the supply chain, software can tell you exactly end to end where do you need to focus on. And software can take gigantic data sets and show you what's important. And that's what, in my opinion, the role that software plays in climate change is making systemic change visually possible. But it doesn't change the fact, and that's something we keep forgetting, that people still need to change. Software will never replace the fact that we all need to do everything differently from the way we do it now. There will be no the AI will be like, yeah, you gotta stop eating meat. Yeah, you still gotta stop doing it. That's the AI will not at the moment, I'm really afraid if I look at like what's happening in the policy space and in public, is that we just say, look, you know what? We just live the way we always do, and technology will solve it. Especially digitalization will solve it. And I'm like, no, sorry, that's not how software works. And yeah, I think that's tech for good. I am skeptical of the idea that everything can be solved by software. I do think a lot of important problems can be solved with software, and I'm generally pro technology, but I just want us to not forget that change is always made by people, and that's why I think Chris's point of strengthening the people is also not to be ignored, because software doesn't make software yet.
Ping-Sun, I've seen you nodding and agreeing. What's your reaction to these questions?
Is that me, right?
Yeah. What's your take on these questions?
谢谢 Frederick. 我觉得 Max 刚才
Thank you for the question. And I think actually what Max has introduced was really funny to me, because it reminds me of some really interesting story in China. For example, for software or algorithm, actually there might be big problem behind it, just as what Chris has mentioned. So when we are trying to develop a new technology, we more than often forget about the existence of human beings. Because, for example, what I have just mentioned, like the delivery service in China is really impressive. So if we take a closer observation at the delivery system, at the time planning algorithm, for example, at the very beginning, the delivery guy needs to get the food delivered within 40 minutes, but later it was reduced to 35 and even 30 minutes. And in the end, the time was for each order is reduced to only 28 minutes. It is because actually the back-end behavioral data collection tells that they need less time, because with the deep learning, they are actually making their own decisions, because they have found out that the delivery guys are actually delivering it faster, because they will get a punishment, or they will be charged with a fine if they do not deliver it within the required time. And in this way, actually, all the delivery guys are trying to catch up to save some time. So they are running faster, or they are driving faster just to be on time or even ahead of the time. So what this example tells us is that in daily life, actually, the infrastructure of all these technologies can be really different. Because as a programmer, when we are programming for a specific function or feature, actually, we didn't really take care about the fact that it can be risky for the delivery guys to run really fast on the road, because they might have traffic accidents. Those are the things that is neglected. And so this is my experience and the story I want to share. Thank you.
That's a fascinating story. I think Max has a reaction.
I just wanted to underline Sophie's link. I think that's exactly what I meant. If you set a boundary condition on data and you say, I don't want my employees, to be observed so that I can optimize them with a machine, that's a very clear boundary condition on the data, and that automatically leads to better software in that sense. That will not, make people just go faster and faster and faster. Which, if you think about it, in a lot of countries, there is in companies a special body, especially in Germany, people are very annoyed by it. That's the Workers' Council. That will, if something like this, they always made sure that doesn't happen. That there's no performance data monitoring, so that it always leads to bad outcomes, in my opinion. And that's what I mean. Let's set boundary conditions on the data that is allowed to go into software, rather than trying to set boundary conditions on software. And Sophie just really very well underlined my point, and I just want to say that. That's it.
I think it also raises questions about when you're building a system, what are you optimizing for? And these are ultimately decisions that are made by humans, by the designers of the systems. They decide we optimize for time. You could optimize for safety. You could optimize for, let's say, the heat with which the food arrives, or there's so many things you could optimize for. I want to move to a slightly different topic, but that's something we also wanted to discuss in this discussion, which is related, but it is really a different kind of discussion. Chris, you wanted to react. Of course, please.
Just a quick boundary point. I think something that has come up increasingly in conversations recently around the world about sort of the challenges of techno-optimism versus realism versus techno-nightmares. Basically, every government on the planet has committed to the fundamental principles of human rights articulated in the United Nations declarations about fundamental human rights. And we do have some boundary commitments that our governments have stated, we shall not cross these lines. And yet we are allowing software companies to cross those lines. We're allowing our own governments to cross those lines frequently. That is something that I think the civil society call to sort of rein it back in. We don't need entirely new declarations of what is acceptable or not acceptable in technology. The tech sector has been complicit in helping us think that they're somehow radically different, when to Max's point, they're not. And this is something that I'm glad that civil society is starting to push very hard on, because the fundamental principles, again, we have made those declarations, we've made those commitments. How do they apply specifically to the technology choices that are being made? And how are we going to regulate around that so that we are not allowing ourselves, our governments, et cetera, to be complicit in violating things that we already said, we agree these rights are sacred and they need to be upheld. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to interject that because I'm glad it's coming up a lot. And I think all of us can do our part in sort of reminding people that we have, as humans around the world, already said there are some things that we just should not do. So we need to stop, to Max's point. Don't allow it to happen in tech.
And this is really, really dangerous, by the way, what Chris is saying, and I agree with it, is that you also hear these arguments all the time, right? That software or digital technology moves so fast that regulation actually just hinders the innovation of it, which is maybe true or maybe not, but doesn't matter. But you still, exactly to Chris' point, there is already fundamental laws in place to protect humanity from wrongdoing. And human rights is something that I think we all respect and agree on. And it's really funny that to this day, software, at least all the technology companies I've ever worked in, human rights are not a consideration when you build software. It doesn't actually matter so much. Or at least I was not educated on it as a developer, which means I can't have put it into software. So
maybe one more follow-up question for Sun then. For the Western listeners, you spend a lot of time with delivery drivers, and I can only speak for Germany. There are a lot of discussions around what it means to work as a delivery driver when essentially the algorithm is your boss and the system tells you, like, directs how your day goes. What are the discussions what are the key lessons you learned from drivers, and what are some of the discussions in China around gig economy work? Because it's sort of like it's at the same time it's an opportunity. If you don't have a job, it is a job, but then at the same time it's a job that comes with lots of negative effects as well.
最近我正好在写一本书关于中国的
So recently I'm writing a book about the delivery service, delivery guys. So it is called Transitional Work, the name of the book. So what we want to express is that it is actually overload in their work, because from our observation in China, actually to do some part-time job is a new way to make a living, but actually they are not really doing it in the long long term, because I can explain in the following aspects. So for them, actually, this is not a sustainable work because there is no so-called career development for them. And the people who choose to be involved in this industry is actually doing work that is like, actually there is no strict requirements or doesn't call for specific skills. You only need to apply for an app, get a scooter, and then get a health check, and that's it. So the technical barrier is very low. So it is open for all groups of people. And the second thing is actually a large number of traffic accidents are caused by the delivery service guys. Because, for example, we have discussed about the problem that they are forced to run faster or drive faster in order to avoid the delayed delivery. But actually, there is no clear structure with it. Everything is flat, and you can't really calculate the time spent on the entire journey. And actually, sometimes there is a miscalculation about the actual distance, because sometimes it's the distance shown is the straight line from A to B. So in this case, actually, not many people would take this as a permanent job in the long run. And the third aspect is the difference between the rural area and the urban area. And I think this is a common problem in many countries. It is the increasing equality between the urban area and the rural area, because you might have heard the immigrant worker from the rural areas moving to the city and trying to make a living there. So actually, it is once you download the app, actually you have no idea what the technology is behind it or how it works. Because people who are really deciding to be a delivery guy is only trying to make a living. So I think it is a tech for living or make a living instead of tech for good, tech for kindness. And just as Chris has mentioned about what civil society should be doing, so everybody is actually involved or responsible for taking care about the vulnerable groups and thinking about how the technology could benefit everyone equally. It is not to exclude a small group of people who doesn't really understand technology or can't make use of it. That's my answer. Thank you.
That's a good transition. I think I would love to talk a bit more about, we've covered the risks and harms, we've covered some of the systemic issues. We talked about conceptually the concept of tech for good versus just talking about the societal impact of technology more broadly. So what can we do? What's the role that you see in this in both philanthropy and civil society as distinct actors? Because we could also spend hours talking about the role of regulation or things that the state should do, but what is the unique contribution or opportunity you see for civil society, but specifically philanthropy in this? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. I really like the points that Sophie made just now, by the way. I think it's a very good reminder to look at it in how it actually affects the people, and really take a close look at how technology directs these jobs and how it is in control. And that boils down to my first recommendation. I think, and I've been advocating for this with our organization for quite some time, is transparency is the #1 priority. On the environmental impact of software, yes. On the societal impact, which is what Sophie just touched upon, how technology makes decisions or how software makes decisions, what data is used to make those decisions, there needs to be supply chain transparency in software the same way it is in every other industry. And it's not hard because this is the data industry. So showing the data of that industry should be very simple for them. And it's a global problem. It's every tech company that I'm aware of currently refuses to give that kind of transparency. So there's a lot of work needed, and to mobilize civil society and mobilize the public, I think is very important. And the second topic is education. And I think we can talk at length about educating, so to say, society about digital technologies and how to use them and what their effects on them are. That's one, but I think the more important one right now is to educate the regulators, because government's job is to set boundary conditions. Doesn't matter in which country you're in, that's always the job. But they can't do that if they don't understand what they're dealing with. And with digital technology, again, like I just said, big data, AI, IoT, data mining, data, artificial, whatever. There's so many words floating around. There's few facts, right? Chris knows one of them. Everybody needs to be connected to the internet. That's a fact. But then from that point on, everything else is a big cloud, of information that is being spun up by the technology sector. And I think I am really afraid of bad regulation, because I do want more software and I do think it's good, but I think it will go either really wrong in the sense that everything will be shut down, or it will go in a way that there will be no regulation ever and we will be ruled by 15 tech companies worldwide, and we have a new government.
Appreciate the pun, Max. That was a very good pun. I agree with what you said. I think my job is primarily to work with regulators and governments, and the experience is really, you very quickly end up, it very quickly becomes incredibly technical. And then you end up in a situation where there are very few independent experts who can speak in the public interest and say, this is how the technology works and this is what you need to do to fix it. And I think that makes it very challenging, and I'm just saying this because it adds to the discussion. It's not a plug, but that's one of the reasons why we at the European AI Fund, one of the first initiatives we decided to do was to really build up the tech policy capacity in Europe, because we felt there are not enough independent experts who can say, how does targeted advertising work? It's a really complicated ecosystem where you need some experts who have no vested interest in regulation going one way or another. Chris, you seem to have also wanted to react to this question. You've already touched upon it before, but if you would say, what are the key things that civil society and philanthropy specifically need to do?
Sure. If I had my wish list. So I think to Max's point, I very much agree. And to your point, Frederike, about beginning to work on regulated training so that we have independent experts under, and this is something I referred to before, so I won't go further on that. I think as I work with philanthropies around the world on this conversation and what philanthropy can do, why philanthropy might need to engage, I think, we need to appreciate the diversity of our sector. Philanthropy is itself very diverse. There are a few foundations on the planet who will get behind something like the European AI Fund and really weigh into a conversation about AI policy, digital rights, this sort of work. An even smaller segment of those who might go beyond regulator training and thinking about that into strategic litigation to actually put a barrier in place. There's all of the nice and sort of medium and long-term work we can do trying to fight corporate lobbyists. And then there's suing people so that they might actually have to stop and take a breath. But again, that's an incredibly, incredibly small part of philanthropy. And then there's everybody else. My background is community foundations. The community foundation I started in a small town in Romania probably isn't going to be doing strategic litigation on AI anytime soon, even if some of those issues might affect the people in that community. Does that mean we do not have a responsibility to engage and learn? Absolutely not. We must learn. And I think where philanthropy can start working particularly well thinking about the masses of philanthropy, the average foundation who's cared about vulnerable communities, who is maybe not ready to become a really technology focused or technology specific funder, is to begin thinking about sort of the frameworks and models for this. Sophie brought up this word. I was thinking about digital poverty when you were speaking, and this idea that you do have a very large chunk of humanity who exists in digital poverty. Poverty is a concept that philanthropy has worked on. Poverty is a concept that philanthropy understands to an extent, thinking about digital poverty and digital equity as there's a line, there's a point that we can work towards in which everyone had relevant access to the internet, fast enough and cheap enough. They had policies in place that made participating in digitalized economies as safe as participating in analog societies, that they had access to the tools and skills and software to be an active user of digital as the world digitalizes, again, with or without them in mind. So thinking about this as a spectrum of, we have to get people to a state of digital equity so that they can participate, so that they can learn, so that they can be empowered stakeholders in digitalization, and then begin generating data and have a reason to care about data and stand up and fight for their data, which can then populate frontier technologies and make sure that AI doesn't come out of the box racist because it is only taking into account a very particular part of society because that's the data it has. So again, working with philanthropy to think about these pieces, to understand that it is happening. You know, you brought up you used this sort of techno-optimist side. I'm absolutely not a techno-optimist. I wish I was. I do think there's room for optimism, but understanding it is happening, basic point there, most of the world for business and nonprofit purposes still uses on-premise solutions. Those are going away. The work that you do using Microsoft Office, overwhelmingly the most used business productivity suite on the planet. Last I checked, based on TechSoup's data of 1.6 million NGOs around the world, decent sample size, about 97% of them are using Microsoft on-premise on their computers. Microsoft just announced recently that that's ending. Half of humanity doesn't have the internet. How are they supposed to keep up with this, right? So right there, again, it's happening. We have to get conversant in what our people need to get up to a state of digital equity, and then start beginning to move through other questions. When people come to us and say they need computers for their work, we can't say, oh, we don't fund digital. Digital is going to be a part of everything we do. It's going to influence everything we do. We have to wrap our heads around that and begin building those frameworks in so that we can help meet our communities where they are as the world digitalizes around them. So think about frameworks, get in the game. If you need help thinking about and talking about these things, please, there are a lot of smart people out there who are willing to talk through this so that we can all become better funders in a digital world. And for those that really want to become digital funders, hey, talk to the European AI Fund, right? Like they're thinking about it. So there are people trying to do these things. It is a responsibility, I think, for all of us to engage, get conversant, and just begin. As much as we're doing climate change, it's time to get serious about digital.
Thanks, Chris. And just a note to say that the fund is really also made up of very diverse foundations. There are some foundations that worked on this for a long time, and for some, the fund is the first entry point. So we're also having the broader philanthropic discussions around how to talk about tech, how to work on tech is something we're also having internally. Before we move on to the Q&A, and I also want to give each of you the opportunity to give a closing statement, I wanted to ask Ping-Sun, you don't work in philanthropy, you're in academia. I'm very curious to hear what's the role that academia can play and science beyond documenting what is happening. What if you could, on your wish list for the funding that needs to happen in academia, what do you think are the most pressing topics that need to be researched?
这是一个好问题。就是作为学者的话，我们可能更多的是从一个
I think this is a good question. As a scholar, we are more seeing from an independent third party to see what is going on. So we've also seen that for all these years, there are more and more NGOs or other social civil societies has joined into the technology philanthropy or technology enabler projects. So personally, I think that as a scholar, we are quite willing to do this joint cooperation between industry and a research institute. For example, we can have some programs or projects and to support to do some of the research or investigation. And for these research and investigations, we can give feedback to our cooperators or give feedback to the related civil societies or medias to do more to speak from a social point of view, to let more people know that this is the current status and we need to change. And I think this is what a lot of scholars are doing right now. Actually, in China, we have many, like Jeff has mentioned, many NGOs are doing this very interesting social experiment. For example, for the rural areas in China, and for each community in these rural areas in China, they're willing to do an app individually, and they will teach all the people in the village to how to use, and they can share the data. And how are they going to do with this data? For example, to deal with some of the relations between neighbors, or in the festivals, which household need donation and how can the other household donate, and or how can they achieve all these democratic, etc. I think these apps are quite interesting. And another part is we've seen a lot of scholars are working together with companies to do the social welfare matters, and they are doing it from the platform base, for example, including the crowdfunding or donation. Actually, we have seen a lot of donating platforms in China, for example, like 水滴筹 or 99 welfare. So what they were doing actually is to help those who are in need, or to help those who are suffering from illness on the internet or on the platform for people to see, and then people can donate and can help. So they are using the social resources. But of course, we found out some of the issues during the investigation, for example, like a trust between people, or for example, if I donate these to you, and what are you going to do with these donations? Or some issues may happen in between. For example, there are some of desperate people. They probably want to do some, they may end up into fraud in order to get this part of money. So there are some cases are happening. So I think a good cooperating mode should be the combination between industry and the research, and also the universities. So we should have the research result, and then we also can guarantee that this result can transfer. I think this would be a good point.
So you're saying it's kind of advantageous to collaborate with industry rather than a potential sort of conflict of interest. Probably depends on how it's done, I assume.
对对对，我会觉得说
yes. I think it may depend on the different contexts. For example, some contexts you can fully immersing and be a part of a company to do this. And another part is, I think we may need to consider a third party perspective, because this is very important, because as a third party, you can see from the outside view to see the issues actually inside the group. And this may be served as a good reminder to avoid that we do something wrong.
Thank you very much for these comments, everyone. Before we move on to our closing statements, we have a number of questions from the audience. And just a reminder for those listening in, you can type your questions in Zoom. You should have a Q&A function, and you can add your questions there. But there's two questions already, and I want to start with one of them. One was, how can individuals have more control of the data that technology collects from us? which is that's again, we could do an entire conference on this, but I'm seeing that Max has some thoughts on this. What's your reaction to the question?
It is definitely the mother of all questions at least in the personal space between, just so to say, my relationship between internet-based services and my data. So how to be more in control? I think there's two types of data. Let's put it like this. There's the one that I'm willingly giving away when I consume a service and I know I'm trading. Take Google search, for example, right? Or that I type something into the search engine and I know that I give them something, so I get something back. I think what's the more interesting question is what about being monitored? So behavioral data, right? So when do I, for example, well, I'll give you a better, more funny example. When you go to website, you get these annoying pop-ups now, thanks to GDPR, allow all cookies or allow tracking cookies and things like this. And actually, I like watching people use computers, and when I see people use it, everybody just clicks allow all. So yes, this question sounds like people care about what data is being stored and tracked about them, but actually, most people don't realize you can just click no. You can say, no, do not allow it to set the cookies. The website still works. But we press the green button just to get through it. So how can you be more in control in data? Use the systems that are there. Install ad blocker, install cookie blockers, say no when it asks you, can I use cookies to track you? And I think there is already some tools in place now to be more in control. I think you can't hold on to it because on the internet, often you trade data versus service. And that's a relationship that we currently have established as a business practice. And as long as I'm not paying for something, I cannot really demand that they somehow have my interest in mind. It's just not how business works.
It's interesting. My view is that a lot of people in the West don't realize that data governance is a huge issue in China too, because everywhere people feel when your data gets stolen, there are issues around identity theft, etc. Does anybody else want to comment on this question? Chris, you've shared some resources in the chat that you want to elaborate on. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. And this is a question, I think, for you, Chris. This is a question from Anna Douglas from Ghana, who asks that in many African countries, only few countries and people have access to computers and the internet. What can we do to increase internet access globally and in Africa specifically? Based on your 20 works of experience, I think this has been a topic in these circles for a long time. But what are really lessons that we've learned? What actually really helps increase internet access effectively?
Well, thanks for the question. Some of you know that I recently left TechSoup to start a new organization that focuses on this exactly. And I think a lot of where we're focusing our efforts is if you look around the world at who is actually delivering useful, fast enough, cheap enough internet access to communities who have been excluded from connectivity, it tends to be a community that we call non-traditional operators. These look like municipalities that are building fiber networks. They look and treating them like a public utility. It looks like internet cooperatives where citizens are coming together and building their own internet infrastructure, usually with the help of philanthropy to get started, philanthropy to help build out the sort of plans and models, leveraging then different kinds of government funds to begin building the actual fiber and the towers that bring their communities online. It's a fascinating movement. It's much larger than people understand. And it's also, again, just proven repeatedly to be the only group that actually brings everybody online and then optimizes for connectivity, not for profit. And if you're interested in the sorts of stories behind that or case studies or examples, feel free to check out connecthumanity.fund, which is our website. There'll be a lot more content coming there. We're pretty new, but also feel free to reach out. Happy to talk, but essentially what is working for everybody is when citizens and civil society start to build their own market where the market is failing them. So what can we do about that? We can start understanding with and through civil society and philanthropy that connectivity and digital equity are solvable challenges, and indeed that they are being solved for very actively in many ways around the world. If anyone were to tell you that we cannot do it, call them a liar, because they're lying to you. It can be done. It just takes a little bit of, I think, understanding about what has worked. The technology's out there. The tools have been built often by civil society to connect their own communities. And so supporting those communities to take what they need versus sort of wait for something that will not be given. So I, very happy. There are lots of reasons to think that the governments of the world might do this work. If they did that, and that's a big if, that doesn't mean we would get the internet that we wanted out of it. They haven't been able to provide that yet. And the corporate sector is not increasing its investments in bringing people online. There's a lot of very clear evidence of that. They are putting less and less money into bringing people online because they've already connected the rich people. And so they're just not building new networks. So we can't wait, we can't just sort of assume something's going to happen when we need it that badly. And so working together to understand how it's worked and starting to invest in that just to make sure that we are going to get what we need through philanthropy, leveraging other resources. And we could go on about that. It's the next 20 years of work, but stop there for the moment.
And just to add to this, it's really a global problem because even in countries in Europe with high internet connectivity, you still have an urban-rural divide where the internet is a lot faster in the cities than they are in rural areas, which means that based on the internet or the way that technology works, if your internet is so slow, you cannot use Microsoft remotely in the cloud from your rural German village, for example. So it really is a global challenge, and it's good to see that work is being done on this. We have one final question before we'll hand it back to Benjamin from the Wings Forum. And this question is, how do we incorporate systems thinking in the software industry? And there's been a side discussion on this in the chat, and Max has already responded. Yeah, maybe just if you can explain what is systems thinking, where's this question coming from, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's a very good one. So let me explain it based on sustainability in general, because that's one of the most, or climate change, if you want to look at it from a purely environmental perspective, which are some of the most profound systems problems we've ever encountered, right? It used to be that if I'm a steel industry, if I'm a steel factory, I look at my factory process, I get iron ore in, I turn it into steel, I roll the steel, I ship it. Systems thinking basically means you have to consider the whole system. So where does the iron ore come from? Transport of the iron ore, the furnace, when it's burning, when you're smelting the iron ore, down to the machines that roll the steel and then shipping it out. And that's complicated. Already me saying that out loud sounded complicated. And I believe that software plays a role in solving these systems problems and looking at these whole value chain views. But how can software itself embrace more of a systems view? That's a really difficult question, given that most software engineers themselves forget that software has a physical footprint. So, or in other words, what you just highlighted, the example of Germany, which I think is the greatest joke in connectivity, that we come from, Frederike and I come from one of the richest countries in the world, and we can't have a phone call on a train. It's it's a bit ridiculous. But software engineers often forget that without connectivity and a certain set of physical infrastructure, servers, power, electricity, there is no software running. And so how can we get a systems thinking view into software community? I think it starts with realizing that it's a big interconnected physical system, same as the power system, for example. Power grids are very complicated, very big systems, and stop software engineers from thinking that software somehow is resource free, that it really literally operates in the cloud, which the word itself really is designed to confuse people, because the cloud is huge and has a huge environmental footprint. But because there is no transparency, we believe everything moving into the cloud somehow It just makes everything resource free and light, and it's just not true. It's just not true. Period.
First of all, thank you all for your very thoughtful contributions. As always, when we talk about these issues, we could go on for hours because the topic is so wide and broad. But I want to thank you all and pass it back on to Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Frederike, and thanks to all our speakers. I think it was a very insightful debate with lots to take in and to digest. And we really hope to continue the conversations with you next year with the Leping Foundation, and hopefully more The World is Our Lab events, possibly to deep dive into some of the specifics, because of course these are extremely broad and critical issues we're discussing, and there's so much more to be explored with philanthropists, with academics. So really thankful also to Frederike for your excellent moderation of a complex debate. I think we'll take away the sort of multi-layered dimension of this reflection on the one hand, how can we leverage technology to increase our social impact, to improve service delivery. We had great examples in the beginning also with the Leslie Go as we were opening, but then quickly we saw that we also need to make sure that we're not excluding big portions of the population and that we ensure digital equity and also leverage the data that we have at the community level and this intelligence that is in civil society right now a bit untapped, and we have all this potential here. But that doesn't stop here. And there is, of course, the broader question of looking at the long-term consequences of these technologies and the kind of societies we're building. And so the importance of educating both citizens and regulators to build healthy and sustainable digital societies. So really appreciated everyone's time. Great to see the diversity of the audience, and thanks for staying until the end of the discussion. We'll see you hopefully next year with more debates. And thanks again to all our speakers and to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Leslie Go, who